Hello and welcome to the podcast series, A Burden for the Times, a conversation on culture and race. I'm your host, Adrian Burden, and I'm with my brothers, Aaron and Anton, to tackle some crucial topics in order to have some clarifying conversation about race. Hey, with my brothers here today, we always like to start off with a little bit of a pop question. And brothers, y'all help me out. What's your favorite movie? As we just go around the thing, favorite movie, or maybe even why is your favorite movie? You can go cartoon, you can go live action, it doesn't matter.
Let's go. Then I'll jump in.
Go, Aaron.
I guess my favorite movie may be, it used to be Toy Story. Like Toy Story was my all time. But then I'm going to have to say that it may be slightly overshadowed by Black Panther. And so,
it overtook it.
And it has nothing to do with why we do clarifying conversations of race and culture. But I will say that it was one of the first movies that I can remember watching and thinking like, oh man, Black people are the heroes. Like, we don't wear the capes, but we're the heroes. Everybody is like, yeah, they want to be like us. So there we go. So
I want to be from Wakanda.
Exactly. Forever.
well, my truck's name is T'Challa. I named my truck T'Challa, and my other truck was Optimus Prime, but this one was T'Challa. So I feel you in that regard. Anton, favorite movie?
Probably, I'd say Prestige or Inception. It's close. I love both those. They're pretty close for me.
Actually, you kind of took mine because I love The Prestige. But if I'm going to say all time, it's call it what it is. Call me corny. It's The Lion King. I love The Lion King. The cartoon, the live action was it was all right, but the cartoon, Lion King, all the way. So that's my thing. Anyway, well, just a little bit of a glimpse into us. I'm sure that really helps your life in a big way. But just kind of add a personal touch that we are real human beings and enjoy different things just like you as well. But look, we're going to start with this. This is the title of the episode is the PC Police, Politically Correct Police. Let's think about this topic, and here's how we're going to address it. We're going to start off by defining the word as we always do, so we have clarifying conversations. The only way we're going to do that is to clarify the definition of what we speak on. We have a couple of questions about it, and then we want to give some hope at the end of it all. So let's start off. Let's define it, number one, by just the dictionary definition that you look at Oxford is just this. Politically correct means the avoidance, often considered as taken to the extremes, of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. So, Aaron, we'll start with you. Give me a nuanced definition, the way you see it. Good as is. What do you want to add for clarification before we start the conversation of politically correct police?
Yeah, no, I think that as we look at it, that's a pretty good definition. I'd probably simplify and just say that maybe it's just the things we say and do that we say sometimes, or we don't say, I guess I should say, that could offend people. And I think it can be good. It can be bad. I think there's some people times where we should think through it, even as Christians with the gospel. There's some things that I believe the gospel says that I want to do it in a way that it's not done in the wrong way. And I think we'd all understand that. It makes sense. And I don't want to offend it because of something I said. But now if the gospel itself offends, that's a whole different story. So I don't want my approach to offend. So I think sometimes political correctness is a good thing, because if I don't know you and I come out and say offensive, crazy things, then yeah, I could turn you off to a lot of things. So if I was going to say it, I think it has some good, but can you take it too far? Of course, it can go way too far.
Anton, do you have anything else that you would add to that?
I agree 100% with everything that was said. The only thing I would put in the little footnote is I do think the term itself is now politicized. I do think it would be
agreed.
To me, it would be a little I don't know. It would be a lie to pretend that political correctness just means what it says in the dictionary. I think we've added the fact that it really is a term for left-wing, typical, if you want to say snowflakes, whatever other synonym you want to throw out there. It is usually aligned with political party as well.
Okay. Now, I'm going to add a little to the definition and let's see if this is fair. Okay. So, when I see political correctness, I don't want to ignore the aspect of political sensitivity. Because is it really fair to say to be sensitive about a certain thing that can be deemed political automatically makes you this politically correct advocate? So let me give you an example. I have a friend who's a pastor who lost his son, and his son was killed because there was a driver who was sleeping at the wheel, ran into his son head on and killed his son. Now, let's just say I went to his church to preach. And when I got up to preach during the introduction, I said, "Hey, praise the Lord. I just made it in here today. Get ready to preach to you guys. I'm getting ready to preach. I tell you, it was a long trip over here. And I had to keep myself awake. I was doing those monster drinks, Red Bulls, trying to get myself over here." Now, if I said that, I could probably say that in other places, and some people it wouldn't be thought. It would just be kind of funny. It would be a light thing. But if I said that at his church, I think we would all agree that would be insensitive. I mean, he would be so offended because he would think people like you is the reason why his son is dead. So what I want to make sure to understand is just because I did not say that phrase of "I drunk a Red Bull on my way to your church" doesn't make me a snowflake. It makes me sensitive to somebody that's going through something and I'm aware of it. So I would say if it's political, let's just say sleeping and driving was a huge political statement. I mean, it's like one of the hot button issues. And for me not to say something about, a certain area just because it somehow has political roots and me to kind of avoid that doesn't make me this negative connotation, like Anton was saying about politically correct. So I would just say I'm kind of separating the two just for our discussion to say, hey, look, we got politically correct and we got politically sensitive. It should be this one and the same. But as Anton, you have already mentioned, it's hard to divorce those two ideas inside of our mind. Does that make sense?
Yep. All right. Yeah.
So are we fine? So I think we're fine with the definition as we continue to go forward. And I just want to point out as well that Jesus cared about the vulnerable in society because by the dictionary definition, politically correct is groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. And so therefore, Jesus did care about the vulnerable in a society. So with that being understood, all right, so we understand the definition of politically correct. Let's move to a couple of questions which are the hot button topics and issues of our society today as it concerns especially race. So should we tear down statues and change the NFL teams' names and what exactly then should be the response to being politically correct? Now, we'll start with those big issues. I have traveled across the country, and as I do, I have seen the statues that have been defaced. I have seen the businesses that have had smashed in windows and the boards and stuff up. So I've seen it firsthand, not just on the news. So is this justified? Is this right? How do you feel about this? Anton, I think that you're probably going to have an interesting view since we do not know what each person is going to say. So what's your take on this, Anton?
Well, first, I would open by saying I am not for, let's go ahead and put the public statement out. I am not for, do not deface any property. I'm not for any of any crimes of any kind. I am not endorsing. But okay. I will say I am for the taking down of a lot of statues.
Oh, wow.
Especially when we're talking about historically speaking, because I think it's, first when evaluating a statue, I think it's not only important to look at the scene. For example, we're talking about a Confederate soldier, for example. Not only that scene, we also have to look at the history at the time when it was erected. Both those things are equally important. I think we'd like to look at one and not the other. But I don't think it's fair to actually evaluate the statue like that. For example, in the state of Virginia, over half, it's about 45% of all the statues that are Confederate statues, did not happen until 1950s, which is in the middle of the civil rights movement. We cannot pretend that those two things have nothing to do with each other. So the erection is not merely to honor someone, it is also to intimidate someone. So we can't just look at it from a standpoint that all statues were made for the same reason, which brings me to my second point of why does a statue exist? and that's my thing with a lot of statues. I think most people would know who has the most statues in the United States if you were just going to guess.
I would guess George Washington, but I don't know.
Precisely. That's a great, and that's exactly right. Now, who is number 2?
Martin Luther King, maybe?
Nope.
No.
Christopher Columbus. That doesn't make any sense. That's irrational in our country. He has nothing to do with this country. So
he was a great American. He was a really great American.
and that would be my point. We do actually have to evaluate the whys instead of just, I think at times we blindly defend tradition because I think, again, we put tradition in with Christianity and we defend it very intensely when in reality, again, this is not a Christian principle. Neither was this a Christian man, and he wasn't an American. So why would he be number 2 over Lincoln, MLK? You've got great options here. So we've made a choice to put someone who is, let's at least say, controversial. And I think it's in the time we live, we can no longer afford to have a completely Eurocentric view of history.
I like that word, Eurocentric view of history. So you mentioned a name as the host, and since we're going to off script, this entire conversation in some ways is going to be off script. Anton, you have a beef with Christopher Columbus?
A beef is a strong word. Yeah, I probably do. That's fair. Not my guy. He's, I think, and this was going to be honestly more in my solutions, but I think the other thing with Christopher Columbus is if you look at the statues, it's just about 60%, which use the word discovered. Now, if you look up the word discovered in the dictionary, it means you were the first.
Exactly.
Which is that's just blatantly false. And the thing is, we all know that. We all laugh because we know it's true. But it's like if a guy, his biggest claim to fame, if you put his monument correctly, it would put Christopher Columbus visited the Caribbean in 1492. And people would be like, why does he have a statue? I visited last year. Like, who cares? It's a meaningless, I shouldn't say meaningless, but let's put in the grand scheme of history, it's trivial. Like, he can't claim that he's the first European because Leif Erikson beat him by 400 years. He met people when he arrived, so it's clear that, so what exactly is it? And not only that, when you look into, again, his social life, the Native American tribe in which he landed on no longer exists because he was a genocidal person who had a lot of other problems that people even admitted in the time of his life. Christopher Columbus' journal is a published document. You can read it, and you can see the fact that he is a somewhat problematic individual. So the idea that, again, to just declare him a hero or just make statements like, because it was another monument, and then it's in Massachusetts, and not only does it say Christopher Columbus discovered America, he was the first of humanity to step foot on this new continent. Although he met people, literal people.
Those people don't count because people worship the devil. They were not Christians. Those people don't count.
I'm like, you can't be the first of humanity. You can't be the discoverer. And again, I was going to say this later and whatever, because I've read so many biographies of David Livingstone. He's one of my favorite missionaries. But the concept that he discovered Victoria Falls, when it's like, if you read any of his biographies, he was led there by over 65 guides. How did he discover it? Like, the man played follow the leader. I respect him, but let's put it where it's at. Like, again, I think a lot of these statues, if it just said what you actually meant. And this is my thing, just like, again, cultural Christianity. Say exactly what you mean. If you mean moral, say the word moral. If you mean he was the first Italian-American to do this, say he was the first Italian-American to do that. But to say, like, a man who was led by hundreds of black natives somewhere discovered something doesn't make any logical sense. And to do so is insulting to pretty much every non-European culture.
Wow. Well, I guess when we start with Anton, boy, we got ourselves something there. So, Aaron, going to you real quick. Well, Anton, I do have a follow-up, but I'm going to do it in just a moment because Aaron might say something about it in yours. But great points. I mean, irrefutable. I like your definition of discover, because if we're going to be true to words and what they mean, and I think we ought to make sure that our monuments reflect that as well. So, Aaron, what do you feel about tear down statues, changing teams' names, all the stuff that's changed as a result of these recent times?
I think Anton's already given the thing, but I do not believe that anybody should be able to go in and vandalize someone else's property, whether you agree with it or not. We live in a country that shouldn't happen. But I'm going to say, I'm going to go out on a limb, and maybe it's a little bit different of an opinion, but I honestly could care lesser about statues, honestly. I see the problem. Like, trust me, if we're going for a player, I see the problem of a statue of Robert E. Lee. I mean, as Anton was talking about Christopher Columbus, George Washington had slaves. Lots of other people did. But George Washington also did a whole lot of other things. We know him for a whole lot of, outside of fighting for the South. I mean, maybe you guys correct me, but I don't know anything else about Robert E. Lee. I mean, well, I guess in our history books, they told us how much he prayed, and then they talk about him being slaves. But outside of that, I don't know much about Robert E. Lee. So he got his fame from fighting for slavery. So I guess in my book, I can see a problem with that statue, just being honest. But I mean, if they put up a Robert E. Lee statue up the road here in Flushing, I'm not going to give it anything. But I guess where I do have a struggle is to say that tearing down statues is changing history, and that'd be a problem. And there's where my problem would come in, because I don't think that tearing down the statue is changing history, because ultimately we all know what happened in history. I guess we can put it this way. We know that history was changed because Black people like us can do this podcast. I don't need a statue for this. Like, me and you can talk because we have freedoms that we didn't have today. I don't need a statue of Robert E. Lee to tell me or even remind me so I don't repeat history. So that would be my big thing, because I think that's a bad argument. And even when we start talking about, and once again, this is not a knock against Christian education, because I praise the Lord for Christian education. But one of the areas that we mess up is we say that tearing down a statue is changing history. But then when we go back and read the history books that we grew up on, those books changed history, like literally rewrote history. And so to say tearing down a statue of Robert E. Lee or whoever down is changing history, that's not. It's just saying we're not going to honor that, like Anton said earlier. But to actually write in a history book that the reason that Black people became over slaves is because the plantations got too big and the white people needed more help is literally changing history. Like, that is rewriting history. And so there, to me, would be the problem versus the statue. So again, if you put a statue up of whoever, Southern general your great-grandpa was, I find that to be a problem. But I don't care if you put your statue up. I do not care for the Confederate flag. I'm not getting mad. I have good friends that have Confederate flags on their trucks. Like, hey, that's you. I can understand it. I really can't, but I'm willing to let you do it. And I'm not going to have a problem. I'm not going to go deface your truck. But I'm going to say, like you said earlier about political sensitivity, I think you can't but look at the documents and say, well, the war was about states' rights. Well, if you read the documents, they were more than about states' rights. Why did Georgia leave the states? This is their exact thing from their secession papers. For the last 10 years, we have had numerous and serious causes of complaint against our non-slaveholding Confederate states with reference to the subject of African slavery. It goes on, while the subordination, the political and social inequality of the African race was fully conceded by all means North and South, it was plainly apparent that slavery would soon disappear from what are now the non-slaveholding states of the original 13. Mississippi, our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies, the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the Black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. So for us to fly a Confederate flag and say it had nothing to do with slavery, that's a hard sell, because obviously they thought it was. For us to be able to say that these people who were fighting for the Southern government were fighting for states' rights, you may be able to find that somewhere in there. But they said they were fighting for the enslavement of Black people. And so, yeah, to put a statue of them, I find wrong. I mean, I could find problems with, but I'm going to go on to say that my biggest thing is to take it down is not to change history. It's just not to honor that, if that ramble made sense.
Oh, I think it was a great ramble. In fact, I wrote down when you were talking, which should be an entire podcast in itself, but when you mentioned about education changing history, not a statue, because I think that sometimes we can be so focused on, oh no, if we do that statue, if we change that, then that's going to cause all of this when, oh, my friend, this has already taken place. And I think that you're pointing out of that situation, man, that was golden, man. Y'all came to tango, man. This is some good stuff when y'all are giving all this information and look into it. As far as the question, should we tear down statues and change teams' names? This is going to seem like a cop out, but I'm going to say I don't know. Isn't that political?
You're politically correct. Thank you.
Thank you. I win. I'm politically correct. I just didn't want to lie. I didn't want to come here and just say it's complicated. It's complicated. It's just I see the side of what this is and what it's been, and I see side of history and just but I cannot expect that the world is going to adhere to Christian principles and being sensitive to other groups of people. But I do expect the Christian community to have the spiritual wherewithal to say that it may not be the ones leading the fight to defend things and symbols that are separating people from the gospel. I mean, I remember working in 3.5 years in Mobile, Alabama. And as I was working with a church plant there with Pastor Keith, and we would drive, and there was a lady, and I'll just call her Mrs. Smith. It was not her name, but just if it mattered to protect her identity. Mrs. Smith was sitting in the van, and as we would drive to church, we were meeting in a separate this facility that was owned by this other church. And as we would drive by every week, there would be a rebel flag that would be right there outside, right as you pull into the church parking lot. And I remember she was an old lady. She said, "Brother Adrian, I'm praying that they are going to take that down one day. I'm praying. It so bothers me as I see what I'm saying is, I don't really care what your position is, and I don't care what your history is. You cannot come to me and say that it's not an obstacle for some people to be able for them to hear truth. So here we got a person who walking by your yard who needs the gospel. Your Holy Spirit puts it on your heart to go speak to them, and you got that big old flag. And y'all remember the preacher. I won't call his name either, but you remember the preacher that had a big old rebel flag? Yeah, we'll talk about it off camera, but yes, he would always carry that big old rebel flag on his Bible and stuff. I'm like, you are alienating people for no reason. This is not going to change the spiritual destiny of a person, and yet you're going to have this on your Bible, for crying out loud, before you get ready to preach and talk to everybody about how awesome it is and how if you think it's an offense symbol, then you got issues. To me, I say I don't know about exactly what we should do with what is already the statues have been erected and stuff during this time. But I can say that as a Christian and the Christian community, I can say boldly that, my friend, if this is affecting your gospel witness, it doesn't really matter what it is. Right. A symbol or not. But anyhow, so question 2 then is, are we being oversensitive in our society today, trying to overcompensate for past wrongs? I mean, it's been interesting to see this. It's because, Aunt Jemima's gone, like
exactly.
Uncle Ben is gone. And not only that, but you even take it a step further that, like, I went to the store in Vermont, and my kid, Jasmine, she has like eczema and stuff on her skin. And so we're always going through Band-Aids and stuff, right? And so as we're going through all these Band-Aids, we found Band-Aids for Black people. Like, you can, like, not just the flesh tone where it says flesh tone nothing, for me, but it's flesh tone, like she's wearing a Band-Aid that matches her. And I jokingly said to my wife, I was like, hey, BLM got their message out. Man, even the Band-Aid companies are getting on board and realizing, man, this is something we ought to be doing, right? So all that to say is this being oversensitive? Are we trying to overcompensate? Anton, will swing with you.
I'm going to say no. And, Aaron brought up the textbooks, and I think that could be a great podcast. But the thing is, what we have done and that's why I don't like the statues and I don't like whatever. And I don't feel that it's overreacting. We've rewritten history in a huge way.
Right.
And I think when people ask me, is it overreacting? One of them, there's a city in Texas literally called Dead Negro Draw. It used to be the N-word. They had to change it in 1963. And actually, Dead Negro, if you look at that name, it's found in over 300 places in the United States. It's not that uncommon of a name. These are not like all petty discussions because it is a broader picture. We're trying to erase an entire history, just like the Washington football team used to be the Washington Redskins. There's only two ways whenever someone says, I didn't know that word was offensive. If someone calls you something, they're either calling you your ethnicity or a way of making fun of your ethnicity. It's really not that complicated. If it's not nice, you know what the only other option is. So when we look at it, it is not being oversensitive to say we did bad things in the past. And a lot of those things aren't gone. There are names that literally I could send to you that are honestly words I wouldn't even say on this podcast that are named after Native Americans, that Native Americans have been petitioning to get away. A very popular one is in Arizona. If anyone, like I said, if you know anything about geography, this idea that this is all about Uncle Ben is merely an idea to try to minimize the damage this has done. If you were a black kid living near a town called Dead Negro Hollow, how do you feel? Let's just be real.
Right.
Do you trust the people in that town? If someone came up to you and said, I'm from that city and shook your hand, I mean, he may be the nicest guy. I'm sure he is. But that's it. Like, we're probably not going to be friends.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
And if you're actually saying I'm looking for equality or I'm a Christian and I'm trying to help things, these are things that obviously have to go. There's no way you can have a discussion in that city about equality because the name is so ridiculous that either people would laugh or just cry because no one's looking for equality in Dead Negro Hollow, a place literally named because a black man was murdered there in 1870. That's literally how it got its name, and no one's like, we should change that.
Exactly.
You know, and one of them, I think the one in Missouri, did change their name on December 12th, 2019. So
I saw the one in Missouri. I'm in Mississippi.
Wow. I didn't know had no idea that such a road would even exist. That's kind of mind-boggling in so many ways. Aaron, is it oversensitivity? What's your view?
I'm going to say that oversensitivity is going to be subjective, right? Some things bother me. I mean, Anton gave it great, so I'm only adding on to what Anton said. So please don't make this a rewrite of what Anton said. But oversensitivity is a big deal to some people. Like you said, your pastor friend that lost a family member. Like there are certain things that cue some people that wouldn't bother other people. So do I believe there's ever a time where I can be too sensitive? I mean, there may be, okay? So there may be overreactions. But for the most part, when you think about people and try to think about where other people are coming from, maybe I'm wrong here and I'm trying to check for blind spots as I'm calculating in my head. But most of the time, caring for people is looking at people where they're at in the situation they are and caring for that. And I think you can't go wrong there. So if you're looking at, like Anton said, was talking about the city names, but if you're a community leader and you know that the only reason a statue is there is because of a Confederate general or something like that, it would seem to me like, hey, why do we have this here? Like, why? It does intrigue me. So I'm going to go off on just a small rant, just a little bit, that Anton talked about kneeling last podcast or a couple podcasts ago, that it is considered anti-patriot, anti-American to kneel, but it is not anti-patriot to fly a flag that literally took up arms against the United States and to be fine with that. So, like, to have that thought and to say that you're oversensitive because you don't want a statue of someone who actually took arms against the country that you live in, that you are patriotic about. If that's oversensitive, then I guess you call me oversensitive. Like, I don't know what else to describe that as. So as we think about it, do I think you can go too far? Oh, yeah. Do I think that you can get into snowflake categories, as we call it, jokingly but not jokingly, to where people can be offended by the slightest drop of a hat? I do believe you can get there. And I believe there's a problem on that end. But do I believe in some of these things right now that are changing? Do I believe we're being oversensitive in them? I don't. And I think it goes back to what Anton was saying. If we only view history through a certain lens, then maybe it's being oversensitive. But when you're looking at the culture from multiple aspects from the top, you're seeing that, hey, there's some Native Americans who've have experienced some terrible things. The Trail of Tears may have been like a paragraph in my history book, but it was more than a paragraph for those families that walked and lost loved ones. So for me to be oversensitive about that I think I should be. Let's go for this, right? And this is going to be, this is a bad illustration, and Anton, Adrian, call me out if it is. But if you had a wife who's been abused for years, right? A physical abuse, verbal abuse for years, and the husband gets right, and he comes back, and he tries to do what's right. Can you not say that he's going to have to be oversensitive about some things for a very long time before she's going to trust him? He can't raise his hand at all if he starts yelling, because it may bring back memories of abuse. Like, he's going to have to be sensitive about a lot of things. He's going to have to change the way he talks, the way he walks, because he's put a lot of distrust in that relationship. And so he's going to have to work hard to make it trust. So he may have to do some extreme things that other husbands may not have to do, but he's going to do them because he wants that trust back from his wife. And it's going to take more than days, more than weeks, maybe even years. And so is it oversensitive? We've made some bad decisions. So we may have to start thinking, how can we make these bad decisions not right? Because we can't go back and change history. But how can we look at them and say, hey, it was a bad call. Let's not honor that. Well, that's my
thought. This might be the platinum edition version of this podcast series. Wow, this is great. Must listen. That illustration you just gave about an abusive husband is about on that level that Anton finished up with on the cultural Christianity and being upset about transgressions against the culture versus transgressions against God. Man, fantastic. I think. Am I cutting you off, Aaron, or is there something you were going to say concerning that more? Or
no, that's just what I'm thinking through. And once again, I want pushback if I was going to.
Well, you got the wrong guy to get some pushback from that. Because I think I look at it, and continuing your thought in a nuanced way is, if you call it oversensitive, some people say, well, that's just an emotional response. I just want to point out that we are all emotional people, and everyone pretends that they're incredibly balanced and has ever the view, the proper view upon everything, quote unquote. But look in our communities and what we see. We look at just back in the past 10 years, we jump from news cycle to news cycle. Like, as far as I'll speak to the Christian community, right? So we're over here, let's send money to Haiti. Hurricane Sandy's hit New York City. So let's send money there. Let's make sure that we're trying to volunteer to go to Hurricane Harvey, go over to Texas. Oh no, Snowden. Oh my goodness, cybersecurity, protect. Oh my goodness, we got to get ready. Gun control. Las Vegas just got shot. That's Las Vegas got shot. We got to get talk to the people and petition for our gun rights. Oh, are we still boycotting Target? Yeah, because I think that we're still mad at them. Like, we move from one thing to another. Like, it's like, just change the news channel and that changes what we now are barking about. And I say that for all of us, but like, let's not say that this is just one community. The Native American people need to understand its history, but just being more emotional, and we should be logical about these situations and understanding that this is part of history. Come on. We are all incredibly driven with emotion, and you cannot have logical and like broken down conversation with emotional people. Not that there's anything wrong with being emotional, and there's nothing better and incredible about being logical. Each one has its place. But when you look at it, you understand that even though when you're being emotional, there are times that people might say, you're being emotional, therefore you're making bad judgment calls. So many people have said the rioting and the looting and different things have happened in different communities, and how it's hurting the own people that are in the communities. And logically, that's exactly right. It is hurting the same community that they're investing in if they're looting and doing all those things to that area. But when you're emotional, sometimes you do things that don't make logistical sense. Like when your mom dies, when your husband or or wife dies and you bang your head against the wall, do you want me to poke my nose into your business and say, well, sir, you realize that banging your head against the wall is not going to help your emotional state. In fact, it's probably going to hurt you even more. It's worse. It's dumb. It's emotion. You do things that even hurt yourself when something happens to shatter your world and shatter what's taking place. Let me make sure I am not condoning and not saying, cool, let's ride. I'm just bringing another aspect of understanding in this area so that to say that we all are emotional, we all move from one thing to another. And so to say that one community is being just way oversensitive and different things might be indicative that we have not poked our nose into the needs of that community. If you sit and listen to this podcast and you don't know why Dead Negro Lane would be offensive, then you probably don't have Negroes in your life. Okay. It's just you have to broaden your horizon to have more of an understanding. So anyway, I think that we can be over that. Yes, people can say it's oversensitive, but it's going to be in the ear of the listener to how that then is interpreted. All right. Real quick, we got to move. How do we solve the problem? What are answers? What do you find to be of helps? Anton, haven't heard from you in a minute. What's going on?
For me, I think the best way to solve the problem is, like I said earlier, be honest. I think first we have to, which Aaron brought up, textbooks. You have to discover history is completely perspective based. Everybody's favorite historical figure is somebody else's villain. I'm not gonna say it's a comic book, but it is.
That's
like,
great.
If you're looking at George Washington, he may be the hero of you, but to the slaves he owned, he wasn't a great man. He was great to you, and I think both those sides have to be respected. You can't just take one view of history and paint it over everyone else. Everyone else just ends up erased. I also think there's a lie that we built into our history, because for me, as we're talking, like I'm going to talk about a Bible character. My favorite Bible character is Peter. The reason Peter is my favorite Bible character is because he's incredibly flawed. I have been Peter at my worst, both a crazy man who's lied and done dumb things many times. And the fact that I have been Peter at my worst gives me the hope that I can be Peter at his best. It's not bad to have problems. And we have erased the problems for all of our historical figures. If you ask a person, tell me something bad about George Washington, the only thing you might get is he had slaves. And usually that will be excused. But that is the only mistake the man ever made in his life, apparently, because no one else has any. This is not helpful for education or anything else. The way we learn is by seeing great people who have also made mistakes. It's both encouraging and instructive. So if you're going to make monuments, that's why tearing them down, I'm for, but I'm not also against adding context. If you want to talk about how great of an explorer Christopher Columbus is, that's great, as long as we acknowledge how bad of a leader he was in other aspects. If you wish to talk about how great others are, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, that's fine, as long as we acknowledge the bad parts. And I don't think that makes them look bad. That makes them look human and gives us something to actually look up to.
Man, I think you had a great quote in there, man. I had to go back and listen to that again. But Aaron, what do you think? Solutions?
I'm going to go right on with Anton's, just continuing on it, just thinking about his villain hero.
Yeah, that
thought is when he says that, you think about this, the first thing that popped in mind is Abraham and Hagar. Like in our mind, Abraham is the great person of the faith. Yeah. But if you're Hagar and Ishmael,
wow.
Like Abraham is not a hero. Like Abraham and Sarah, they are the people who cast you out and gave you one of the richest men in the world who gives you bread and water and tells you to hit the road. They're not heroes in their book. And so from their perspective, Abraham may have been a great guy for everybody else, but he's not. Now I will go back and say that the Lord told Abraham to let her go, because he would take care of him. And God in his wonderful grace took great care of Hagar and Ishmael. But in the story, like you're saying, that they're not heroes. And that's what I think, like Anton says, just adding on to that, the fix is we stop making these legends and heroic stories from history. Like the Bible, God does such a great job in the Bible of showing us the good, the bad, and the ugly of people. Like, hey, David's great. Peter, like we start walking through, one of my favorite Bible characters is Barnabas, right? And I love Barnabas because Barnabas is an encourager, and this is like what I hope to be. But even Barnabas got caught up with Peter in the whoa, Gentiles, I'm not going to be seen with them. And Barnabas got pulled up in it. Like, God's not like, hey, here's some good people, and they wasn't going. We have often had Joseph painted in a good way in the Bible, like when we're Bible stories and teachers, but Joseph was pretty arrogant. Like, Joseph was an arrogant kid. And as we start looking at it, the Bible says it. Now, we've kind of made a hero is, because, I mean, can you imagine how, like, we make it a hero, but if Anton had walked in the room one day and told us that we were all going to work and bow down to him, like, and we're like playing video games, and Anton comes in and is like, hey, dudes, I have a dream. You guys are going to work for me, bow down to me. I'm the king of this family. Anton, for those you don't know, Anton's 10 years younger than me. So I'm going to tell you, like, at 18 and Anton walking at 8, I'm not taking that seriously. And so when we start looking at it, well, we make these hero stories, and so then we like put these people on pedestals, and the fall from a pedestal is a lot higher than the fall from the ground. Like, if they just walk on the ground, we're just like, hey, it's okay. I mean, well, it's not. No, let me back up. It's not okay. It's not okay. But humans, we're going to forgive like we've been forgiven, and we're going to try to move forward. And so one of the big illustrations I find of this, right, is, and it really changed my, well, hold on. I'll save that because I'll make it my pick. I'll need my tool. So hold on. I'll hold off on that. Hold.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Well, everybody's sharing their favorite Bible character. I don't know if mine fits into this, but mine's Abishai, by the way, but it has nothing to do with everything going on. But I'm going to speak to the Christian community, especially with this about how do we solve the problem. I don't have a word for it. So what I do when I don't have a word for something, I make up a word. And so my wife is very, very familiar with this practice that I have. And I would say that to be able to solve this problem, we got a political correctness is a happy holiday syndrome. This is what I call the happy holiday syndrome. See, here's what I mean is sometimes Christians can do this, like because of the fact that happy holidays is sometimes been used to be an attempt to take out Jesus from Christmas. Merry Christmas, Christ in Christmas. So therefore, I'm not saying that it's not happening. I'm not saying it's not a direct attempt by people to do so. But there's this guy who works at Target who's about 18 years old, got his first job. He was told to say happy holidays to every person that comes in and out of Target. And here comes the Christian who just got filled up with the news. And then this young man says, hey, have a great day, happy holidays. And the Christian turns, gives him a look and a glare of, oh, I can't stand you, of like, come on. The kid is not part of this entire world system to take Jesus out of Christmas. Yes, he's just doing what he's told. He's just saying happy holidays. Leave the kid alone. I call it happy holiday syndrome is a crazy knee-jerk system, a knee-jerk response to something that doesn't require. So, for example, political correctness is just because somebody says something about being politically sensitive toward another group of people. So we're sitting inside of a restaurant and we're kind of talking and there's an unsafe person present and then there's a politically charged thing and a sensitive, if it was any other topic, we would be sensitive and says, you know what, it's not that important. But because it has ties to a political agenda that we feel is either taking our liberties or muting those who have voices or whatever it is, we go happy holiday syndrome on them and start saying things. And this person is sitting here and just saying, I really didn't mean anything by that. Or I didn't like the name. And so I thought it was okay for it to be changed. Or I wasn't cool with whatever the situation is. We sometimes can knee jerk. And I say part of the solution in helping is just before we're so apt to be so incredibly politically correct, let's be politically sensitive. And then if correction is needed, if this is going to be something that's going to advance the gospel or anything like that, then fine. Let's think through it and let's investigate and be able to make the logical conclusions that are necessary. I think that walking around as Christians with chips on our shoulder concerning things that are politically charged, we are doing nothing to advance the cause of Christ in these areas. So empathetic beyond our understanding is many times what I've concluded it as, called it, but I think that's going to be so important. Let's wrap this up with tips and tools. Aaron, I think you already had yours on the tip of your tongue, so go ahead and say it.
Yeah. Well, my tool, I was trying not to do books, but every time in the middle of the episode, it changes. My tool changes. So my tool is going to be a book called Sachiko, a Nagasaki bomb survivor's story. Sachiko survived the atomic bomb. And in the book, she describes what it was like to be in the city with people running by her on fire, like the ground not being able to have grow grass for years, like all the things that happened from the dropping of the atomic bomb. Now, the reason I'm saying that this is going to be my pick is because it opened my eyes to see something from another person's perspective. I'm an American. I lived in the country that dropped the bomb. I was taught exactly why it was good for us to drop the bomb. This pick is not arguing whether we should or should not have dropped the atomic bomb. It's read the account of the people who lived through it. Wow. And look at what happened. She ended up coming to America. She came to America. She was pro-American. Another person that Helen Keller, the socialist Helen Keller that we love to talk about so much, but she was a big fan of Helen Keller. But just listen to her describe what it was like as a kid watching people die from the atomic bomb. And then once again, I'm not trying to say whether it was right or wrong. I'm not saying America shouldn't. I'm saying put on her perspective for just a little bit. And then when she came, like the Smithsonian Institute, at the end of the book, they talk about the Smithsonian Institute was going to make a, they had an exhibit that they're going to make for the dropping of the atomic bomb. They're going to put the plane in it and everything. And the veterans groups refused to let them do it because it would make America look bad when people started to see how many people died and how the different things happened. So we're dealing with our conversation. All these things, good or bad, I'm not trying to say they are. You may say drop the atomic bomb. You may say we shouldn't have dropped the atomic bomb. That's not even an argument I'm trying to have. But I'm saying for a person who survived it and listening to their story and then hearing how the Smithsonian said pulled back because the veterans group said, hey, we don't want to make America look bad because we did this. It's kind of fitting the same narrative, right? We do hide the things we don't want to talk about and we kind of rewrite those. But sometimes good, bad. We may have needed to drop a bomb to stop a war to save American lives. I hear that. But I still hear that there's a lot of innocent people who died, and it's a hard thing to listen to. So that's going to be my pick, Sachiko, a Nagasaki bomb survivor story.
I look forward to you putting that link in the show notes. Anton, what's your pick?
I'm picking a book as well. I'm going to pick Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American Textbook Got Wrong.
That's in my
list. It's a very good book, and I think it's very eye-opening. I think one of the things it deals with is like MLK and the way we see MLK today. Although 3 out of 4 white Americans at the time of his assassination actually referred to him as both a bad person, 33% went as far as to say a racist. But if you look at it, any textbook, he's like the one guy everybody loved it.
Right.
How we've just gone back in history and taken people and either idolized them to the point of he must have been the most popular man in the world at the time, or have just completely taken out anything. Like Aaron brought up Helen Keller and the fact that she was a socialist, also someone who gave a lot to NAACP. But after she hits about 18 in most textbooks, she disappears. Like you hear nothing else about her. You know her childhood, but then where did she go? And you never figure it out. But that book deals with a lot of those people and filling in the gaps, and I think it's a really good book.
Well, man, y'all got some good picks. Both of those I feel like need to be in my next inside of my Goodreads here. But I'm gonna recommend a book. That's crazy. I guess we're on the book trail today. But I would say for my book, read a book that is different than what you culturally are. I don't even care what it is. I began in our circles, you guys know, as far as our Christian circles, which we run with as far as Baptists, I began looking yesterday, just started combing through all the top books on the great publications. And they're great publications. Please understand that I'm not hating on these publications, but I went through all of them and I couldn't find a black author of any of the books. And I would dare say that, let's just say I'm speaking to a majority white community. If you're a white community, you grew up in a Christian context, have you ever read a book by someone who's black? Like ever? And if you're black, have you ever read a book by someone who's white? Now, the chances are very high because if you live in the United States of America, it's hard not to read history and not know it. But so I'll flip it and just say, have you ever read a book that for your own good, for your own growth by somebody who's who's black. You say, why is that different? Because we're all people. We want to claim that now, that we're all the same. But I understand we're all people, but we all do have different perspective. Japanese are people too, but guess what? They have a perspective about, World War II and the atomic bomb than we do. So I think that it would be beneficial and helpful that I don't even really care what the book is. Just a book by somebody who is culturally different than you, and given the context of what we're talking about, politically correct, and these statues and Uncle Ben and all this other stuff, read someone black. Anybody. So those are our picks. I don't necessarily, mine doesn't necessarily going to have a link to it, but it will be just a thought to challenge you with, to be able to explore somebody that has a different perspective. So with that being said, all hearts and minds clear. Is everybody, any other last statements or anything? I think it's been a great podcast. It's been a little bit longer, but I do believe it's been beneficial. Any other thoughts?
Can I just?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aaron. Take it over.
I was going to say, can I add to the your tip? As far as reading a book, when you said we're all one people, it's funny because when it comes to eating food, we love diversity, right? We have no problem with saying Asian food, Mexican food, soul food. We have no problem with it. But then when it comes to reading and what people bring to the table with their thoughts and their actual thought processes, it's just as different as the food. And it probably is just as great to have that diversity when you start reading through these books. So I just wanted to throw that in.
That's a great point, because we start singing "Circle of Life" when it starts kind of start making the breakdowns as far as the way people respond. Anton, do you have any other thoughts?
I guess Aaron made me laugh because I thought about it the other day, because people were like, we're all American, we're all this. And then it was like you started talking about slavery. I didn't own any slaves.
Exactly.
Or two, we won Korea, we're doing this. No, I'm out.
Wow.
Those reasons I'm out.
Exactly.
Wow. If you're a listener and you're wondering what our conversations as brothers are like on a normal day, the end of this podcast right here is very similar to what we talk about on a normal day. But anyway, we thank you so much for joining us for the podcast this time around. We hope that it's been insightful and encouraging. If you have questions or concerns or different things you would like to add to the conversation, we encourage you to email us at aburdenforthetimes@gmail.com. And we look forward for you joining us next time.